and just very blessed to be here. Thankful for Pastor David and Janae and you guys and your ministry and being allowed to be a part of what's happening here. Let me introduce you to my family. I think the guys have got some pictures. My beautiful wife, there she is. That's my beautiful wife, Terry. We've been married for 30 years. And I know what you're thinking, Ron, you don't look old enough to be married for 30 years. That was a good time to say amen. So that's my beautiful wife, Terry, and then my oldest daughter, Candace, and her husband, Wes, and my two grandbabies. They are on staff at a great church just north of Charlotte called the Cove Church, part of the pastoral team there. And then my youngest daughter, Emily, and her husband, Zach, they live in Cape Town. A few months ago, about a year ago, we moved from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and I asked my daughter, I said, would you guys like to move with us? They said, no way. No, we're not moving from Cape Town. And so they live in Cape Town, and it is one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth. They are web designers. They work for a company in Cape Town, and the guys that own the company are part of our kingdom builders. That means they finance the vision of the church, and they're involved in that ministry and just doing a great job. Really proud of them. But about a year ago, just like David said, about a year ago, my wife and I, we moved from Cape Town, Hillsong in Cape Town. My pastor, who's Phil Dooley, he is, if you saw him, you would think, okay, he looks like Jesus, but he looks like an Australian surfer too. So I'm pretty sure that, yeah, that's my pastor. My pastor, Phil and Lucinda Dooley, head up Hillsong in Cape Town. He sat me down. He says, Ron, how do you feel about moving to Johannesburg? And I said, well, never thought about moving to Johannesburg. What have you got in mind? He said, hey, we've got a campus in Pretoria. We would like you and Terry to take it over, and we'd like you to plant a campus in Johannesburg. We didn't have a campus in Johannesburg at the time, and so when he said that, something just leapt in my heart. And I said, absolutely, we would be honored to do that. And I left that meeting, and I went outside where my wife Terry was, and I said, hey, guess what? I said, we're moving to Johannesburg. She goes, I knew it. I knew that's what the meeting was about. And so we packed everything up, and we moved from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and we planted a church right in the inner city of Johannesburg. It's an area of the city that's experienced a whole lot of decline, a whole lot of decay. People are moving out, the money's moving out, businesses are moving out. And it's been that way for about 20 years. And so we went into that area thinking, hey, we want to be a light to this community. We want to see what God can do. We want to provide answers and hope where people don't have any. And so we found a theater right in the inner city of Johannesburg. It seats about 500 people. And we launched it in March of this year, and it is growing. It is pumping. We're up to about 1,000 people on any given Sunday now. And we have people, amen. We have people coming to church on Sunday who spent the night under a street building on the sidewalk, who live in their cars, who live in a township, people coming in from the suburb. People from all walks of life are coming to church and finding answers, finding hope. About 2 months ago, we baptized. For the first time this year, we baptized about 150 people. And David, we got a big tank, a big mobile tank, and we put it right out on the sidewalk, out in front of the church, right out on the sidewalk, and we had the music pumping, and we're baptizing people. Across the street, there's a big apartment complex. People are hanging out the window. What in God's green earth is going on out here? And baptized 150 or so people. Between our two campuses in Pretoria, amen. Between our two campuses in Pretoria and Johannesburg, we've seen over 3,000 people this year make decisions for Jesus. And so I just believe that God's got great things in store for South Africa. Her best days are not behind, but her best days are ahead. And we're just blessed and privileged to be a part of what God is doing in that part of the world. Amen. Well, hey, I hope you brought your Bibles this morning. Don't go quiet on me now. Okay, you got to help me preach. You got to help me preach this thing. So you can wave a hanky. You can shout, "Preach it, white boy." You can, if your idea of response is tapping your toe, just get ready. And so I just believe that God's going to speak to us this morning. I believe He's got something for us this morning. I want to talk to you for just a few minutes out of the book of Deuteronomy. Speak to you a little bit about that. That word Deuteronomy means words. So we're going to talk about the book of words this morning. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So Moses has been leading the children of Israel around the desert, and now it's just about time to cross over into the promised land and take hold of their inheritance. So God has promised the children of Israel, hey, it's out there. They've been wandering around the desert for 40 years. Their clothes haven't worn out. Their sandals haven't worn out. They've been eating manna. God's been looking after them, taking care of them. And now it's about time. They're just about to cross over into the promised land. But first, there's a bit of a battle that has to happen. Have you ever noticed that in your own life when God's got something out there? You can see it. It's in your heart. It's a dream. It's a vision. And before you can grab hold of that thing, there seems to be a challenge, a roadblock, a speed bump, some sort of a challenge before you lay hold of and grab hold of everything that God has for you. Maybe it's a health situation in your body. There's an element of faith, of digging into the Word and finding God's scriptures. Whatever the situation, whatever the case may be, whatever God has promised you, there always seems to be a challenge or a battle before you grab hold of that thing. You grab hold of it by faith, you pull it on in, and then you walk right through it. There's no avoiding it. There's no walking around it. There's no easy way. It just seems like there's a challenge, and with God's help, we're going to go through that thing into the promised land. And that's what God is speaking to Moses. He's saying, okay, here we are. We're 40 years into this thing. I'm going to transform this nation from a nation of slaves, wandering, compromising slaves, into a nation of conquerors. And God's got this plan for these people. And so Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 24, we'll start there. Rise, God's saying, rise, take your journey and cross over the river Arnon. Look, I have given into your hands Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his land. So watch what it says here. Begin to possess it. Begin to possess it. Take it. You're going to go in and you're going to take it. Possess this land and engage him in battle. In other words, Moses, I want you guys to go in and pick a fight. Go in and pick a fight. I'm with you in this thing. This is the plan. You're going to go pick a fight with these guys. Engage them in battle. Verse 25, this day I'll begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the nations under the whole heaven. Under the whole heaven, who shall hear the report of you and shall tremble and be in anguish because of you. So here's this promised land. God's leading him into a new season. And he's telling them, look, I know that you've gone through generations of fear, generations of doubt, whole lot of things going on here, but I'm going to take you into this promised land. You're no longer going to be slaves. You're no longer going to be a nation known as compromisers. You're going to be a nation of heroes, of conquerors, and now is the time. You're going to head on into this place. There's going to be a complete identity shift. I'm going to put my hand on you. I'm going to be with you as you go into this battle. Engage the enemy. Clear instructions, right? No big deal. Moses, just go in, pick a fight. I'm with you. I'm with you. Don't go around it. Pick a fight with Heshbon. Sihon, king of Heshbon. So watch what Moses does here. Verse 26. Moses is talking. He says, I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemoth to Sihon, king of Heshbon, with words of peace. Are you kidding me? Words of peace? God's saying pick a fight, and Moses is going, oh, okay, we're going to send messengers in, saying, let me pass through your land. I'll keep strictly to the road, and I won't turn neither to the right or to the left, and you shall sell me food for money that I may eat, and give me water for money that I may drink. Only let me pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau, who dwell in Seir, and the Moabites who dwell in Ar did for me, until I cross the Jordan to the land which the Lord God is giving us. I mean, when you see that, you gotta wonder, Moses, what are you thinking? God's saying go pick a fight, and you're saying, hey, I know what we're gonna do. We're gonna find the nicest people. In all of our 7 million people or so, we're going to find the nicest people and get them all together, and we're going to send them over to Sihon the king and say, hey, do you guys mind? I mean, if we pass through, we promise we won't step on the flowers, we'll keep to the path, and if you've got some nachos, we'll buy them. If you've got some hot dogs for the kids, we'll buy them. Peanut butter and jelly's good, no problem. Sell us water, and we're just going to scoot on by your land and into our promised land. You got to wonder, Moses, were you at the same meeting with God? Did you hear what he said? And he decides, maybe he decides, hey, I've got a better plan. Have you ever sent your kids to the store and told them, hey, I need you to go down to the store and get me a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk. Give me a loaf of that brown bread. Don't buy the white stuff. Buy the healthy, whole wheat stuff. Let me just write it down on a note and I'll pin it to your shirt. Just get me a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk. Bring it back. How many can say teenagers? And when they come back, they've got a goat and a box of candles. You send them out for one thing, and they start thinking, we don't need any milk and bread. I'll just buy a goat on the side of the road, on the way, whatever. And this is what Moses has done. He hears one thing from God and decides, hey, maybe there's another way. Maybe we can just kind of scoot through and avoid this battle, and we'll get to the next one. How many of you know there are people that do that their whole lives? They avoid the hard conversations. They avoid the debt problem. They avoid the addiction. They avoid the things that are holding them back. And rather than confronting those things, they scoot across over to this side, and maybe I'll just get around it. Maybe there's another way, rather than confronting this thing head on in their lives. That is good, isn't it? Maybe, I don't know why Moses did what he did. I don't know if maybe it was there's so much wandering. I don't know if it was he was tired. I don't know if he was frustrated, or there was just not a culture of faith. I don't know why Moses decided, hey, God, I hear what you're saying, but I like my plan better. But I know this, the first step is always the hardest. There are times I don't know why I won't believe, why I won't take God at his word and just buy into it and believe what he says. Why do I put it off? Why don't I just buy into it right now when there's a promise in his word? And why don't I believe in it? Why don't you believe it? And Moses does the same thing, and he thinks, well, maybe there's another way through this thing. I know this, though, that the first step is always the toughest. The first step to come down for prayer. the first time you tithe, the first time you give, the first time that you decide to join a connect group or get involved in church in a deeper level. The first time is always the hardest time. God's saying to Moses, Moses, that isn't my best for you. I see what you're doing, but God is saying, I'm not going to let you compromise on this. If you're not going to fight this battle, I'm going to bring the battle to you. So watch what happens. Let's keep reading. I'm going to bring the battle to you. There's no easy route. We're not going around this. Verse 30, but Sihon, king of Heshbon, would not let us pass through. For the Lord your God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate. Why? That he might deliver him into your hand as it is this day. And the Lord said to me, see, Moses, I have begun to give Sihon and his land over to you. In other words, I'm already at work. Your breakthrough is coming. God's orchestrating it. He's planning it. You're going to come out on top on this thing, but you're going to have to do it my way. Begin to possess it. Take that first step. Begin to possess it, that you may inherit the land. And then Sihon and all his people came out against us to fight at Jahaz. Moses, God's saying, Moses, if you're not going to go to Sihon, I'm going to bring Sihon to you. And Moses is confronted with this thing. He's at a point in his life and in his ministry where he has to look to God as his source. Okay, God, I can try to do it in my own strength, and my idea is avoiding the battle. Or I can do it your way and go right through the middle of it and become a conquering nation. You see, when we do things our way, we take a step over here away from God, and we begin doing things in our own strength. We do our finances in our own strength. We do our marriage in our own strength. We do our work in our own strength. But when we do it God's way and we're obedient to him, we come under this blessing and this favor and this grace that comes upon us. And now all of a sudden, we're doing our finances with God's help. We're doing our marriage with God's help. We're doing our job and our career and our business with God's help. When we do it his way. How often is it the same with you and me? We have a better plan or a better idea, and God's saying, if you'll do it my way, if you'll go through the battle, I'll be with you in this thing. In verse 33, God's about to bless the children of Israel with a battle. Those are two words we don't hear very often, blessing in the battle. Verse 33, and the Lord our God delivered him over to us, so we defeated him, his sons and all of his people. We took all the cities at that time, and we utterly destroyed the men, the women, the little ones of every city, and left none remaining. We took only the livestock as plunder for ourselves, with the spoil of the cities which we took from Eror, which is on the bank of the river Arnon, and the city that is in the ravine as far as Gilead. There was not one city too strong for us. The Lord our God delivered all to us. God comes in to the scene, and he's saying, Moses, these cities that look so big and so imposing 40 years ago, these cities that caused fear and dread and made you look like grasshoppers in your own sight, those cities are still here today. In fact, if you read the Bible, it says that these people were in fear and dread of the children of Israel. They've been living in fear for 40 years. And Moses and the children of Israel, they come to these cities, and they're already defeated. Moses, they come into these cities, and God's telling them, hey, you're a strong people. After today, there's going to be an identity shift. You will no longer be seen as slaves. You're no longer going to be seen as wandering people who compromise. You're going to come out of this thing victorious. These same cities that held you back before, they're no longer going to hold you back. God's telling them, hey, I know your past. I know your regrets. I know your failures. I know what's going on in your life. And I'm going to take you from this point, and you're going to be victorious. So what can we learn from this? What can we take away from this story? First thing is this. I've got 3 points, 3 thoughts. First one is this. It's God's love that transforms us from a slave to a conqueror. It's God's love that transforms us from a slave to a conqueror. The children of Israel had been defined as slaves. That was their identity. They came out of Egypt as slaves, wandering in the desert for 40 years, known as slaves. And God transforms them into this people who's victorious. But first they've got to go through this battle. And as they fight the battle, one city falls, and then the next city falls, and the next city falls. And when they stepped out in faith, now they're experiencing God's favor and His blessing and His mighty power. And now their confidence grows. And when they take the next city, the next challenge, the next battle, there's this experience that they can rely on. Not only God's word, but now they can rely on their own experiences, because now I've got something under my belt. I know that God was with me in the first battle. He's going to be with me in the next battle. He's going to be with me in the next battle. And God slowly begins transforming these people from slaves to conquerors. And now they're getting a hold of something in their own hearts. It's God's love that does that. Man, Ron, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just trying to keep my kids in school. I'm just trying to put food on the table. I'm just trying to keep my marriage together. God's got such a better plan for your life. So many times I think we settle for plan B. We settle for plan C because, well, that's just a little bit easier. I don't have to trust God for that. I can just do it in my own strength. Are you with me? I'll just grab a hold of what I can see, because I can see that. I know my own strength. I know my own ability. But when we are faced with circumstances, we're faced with situations where we have to put our whole trust in God. Well, that requires seeing into the unknown. That requires patience. That requires putting our whole trust in God. That requires walking on water. I'm just trying to keep it all together, but can I tell you, God did not send His Son Jesus to die on a cross for us to settle for plan B. He did not send His Son Jesus so that we could live with crazy, to live with chaos. He sent Jesus so that we could live a victorious life. The Apostle Paul knew something about trials and battles. In Romans 8, verse 31, he says this. He says, What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Don't you just love that? If God is for us, who can be against us? Verse 35, it continues. He says, Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? As it is written, for your sake we're killed all day long. We're counted as sheep for the slaughter. Verse 37, yet in all these things we are what? More than conquerors. We are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. Paul is saying, no matter what it is that I face, whatever it is that comes against me, whatever challenge that comes against us, not in my own strength, but through Him, we're more than conquerors. This thing ends well. We win. Sometimes it's just a matter of digging your heels in and saying, I'm not moving until the victory comes. I'm not moving until the breakthrough comes. I'm hanging on. I'm standing in God's word. And it's His love that transforms us from an unbelieving doubter to a person of faith. And we see His love and we see His breakthrough. I wrote this down. It's one thing to be set free, but it's another thing to live free. It's one thing to be set free, but it's another thing to live free. He came to set us free. Second thought is this. He knows. God knows. You know, I don't know your journey I don't know if it's a 5-year journey or a 16-year journey or a 40-year journey. I don't know where you're at in life. I don't know what it is that you're facing, but He knows. He knows. He knows the twists and the turns. He knows the rest stop on the road. He knows where you've taken a break. He knows the corner that's up ahead, the one that you can't see ahead. The one you can't see around that corner. God knows what's around the corner. He knows what you're facing. He knows what you're facing in your marriage. He knows what you're facing with your kids. He knows. He knows. Those words have sustained my wife and I for the last 5 years. He knows what you're going through. He knows what you're dealing with. He knows the circumstances. He knows the situation. And when we step aside and let Him in, His power comes with, His grace and His favor and His mercy comes in as well. You're not alone. You're not alone. Job said it like this in his darkest moment in Job 23, verse 8. I don't know why it is that when we're going through a battle and a tough situation, we open the Bible to Job. You ever notice that? Maybe we just like to read about a person who's had it worse than we did. But here's the thing about Job. When calamity came, when disaster came, when his wife turned his back on him, he dropped to his knees and he began to worship God. I can't go through this alone. And he gave God the glory. He gave God the praise. And eventually God turned it around. Job 23, verse 8. It says, look, I go forward, but He's not there, and backwards, but I cannot perceive Him. When He works on the left, I can't behold Him. And when he turns to the right hand, I cannot see Him, but He knows. But He knows. He knows the way that I take. When He has tested me, I shall come forth as gold, as gold. Just because you might be in a midnight hour, you might be in a tough season, circumstances that are against you, that does not mean God isn't moving in the background. Just because when it seems like the pressure's on and you pray and it seems like your prayers bounce off the ceiling and come right back to you, that doesn't mean that God doesn't hear your prayer, that He isn't moving in your situation, in your circumstance. He is orchestrating your breakthrough right now, this very morning. He's got a plan. He's had a plan. He's walking His plan out. And if He just had our cooperation. Verse 42 in Job, it says, and the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Now in verse 12, now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than the beginning. See, what Job did not do is he didn't disconnect himself from the vine. He stayed connected to the vine, and that power of God just continued to flow into his life. Despite the circumstances, despite what was going on, Job stayed connected to the vine. When you're connected to the vine, that's the source. That's the source of life. That's the source of help. And Jesus talks about it in John chapter 15, if you'll stay connected to me, because apart from me, you can do nothing. That's a faith reality right there. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You don't see branches laying on the ground bearing fruit. Job stayed connected to the vine and his hope came. Last thought is this. Thought number 3. There's a blessing in the battle. There's a blessing in the battle. Seriously? There's a blessing in the battle. So, you see, so many times, the blessing is disguised as a tough season, as a challenge, as something that we've got to get through and work towards, and it doesn't just come up to you in the middle of a battle The blessing doesn't come up to you in a red t-shirt and say, yo, I am your blessing, I'm right here. Generally, that victory, that breakthrough, that blessing comes in the middle of a dark moment, in the middle of a tough season. But that victory is just ahead. Because God isn't going to leave you abandoned. He's not going to leave you as an orphan. He's working it out. Generally, it comes disguised as something we would want to avoid. I don't know what you're facing today. Maybe it's good, maybe things are going great, but just knowing life, you're probably going to come into a season where things are tough, and if things are tough, we as believers have to dig into the Word and know that God is for us and not against us, and be able to stand on His Word and know that there's a victory coming. Despite what I'm facing, there's a victory coming. When I was a kid in our school, we did show and tell. How many remember show and tell? At our school, when I was in 4th grade at Mountain View Elementary School, our class did show and tell. And show and tell was actually a pretty cool thing after Christmas, because then you got some stuff that you can bring in and talk about. And how many of you know we still do show and tell even as adults? That new handbag that you got, or that new fishing pole. You can be sitting at the break table talking about something, and you're just waiting for your moment to turn that conversation and begin talking about your new fishing pole. Nothing ever changes. And so at my school, 4th grade, we're doing show and tell. And our teacher had this list on the back wall, and so during the week, we could write down the day that we were going to do show and tell and what it was that we were going to bring. So my day was Thursday, and I decided I'm going to bring my G.I. Joe to class. And it was a cool G.I. Joe. It was a G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. And remember that? Can I tell you, my dad would not let me play with G.I. Joes, because no son of his was going to play with dolls. I don't care if it's a G.I. Joe, it is a doll. So my friend across the street, Daryl Morton, had G.I. Joe. So my G.I. Joe lived at Daryl Morton's house. And so that the next day I come to school, and I look on the wall, and on the wall is the schedule, and my friend had put down on Wednesday that he was going to bring his G.I. Joe. Now, how many of you know that just doesn't work? I mean, you can't come in on Thursday with G.I. Joe after somebody already brought G.I. Joe on Wednesday. That is just so uncool. And so Wednesday comes along, and he's up there with his G.I. Joe talking about it, and he doesn't have just a regular one. It's a collector's edition. It's the one in the box that you set down, and it hadn't been opened. It's cool, it's clean, and it's a collector's edition G.I. Joe. And my G.I. Joe, it's all beat up. It's got scars, it's been drugged through the mud, it's dirty, its clothes are ripped. And so I'm thinking to myself, as he's sharing about his G.I. Joe up here, he's up here sharing about it. The teacher asks him, hey, do you want to pass it around? No, it's a collector's edition. Y'all can come up here and see it. And so we get up out of our chairs and we come and see his G.I. Joe, and I'm like, so the next day, I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? I mean, I don't have a collector's edition. Mine isn't in a box. My G.I. Joe's all beat up. And so I had this idea. I'm going to take my G.I. Joe and I'm going to throw him up in the air. I'm going to drag him through the mud. And I broke his arm off, and I duct taped his arm together. And I brought him in. I brought him in to show and tell on Thursday. And I set him up here and I said, this is my G.I. Joe. He's not a box G.I. Joe. He's been through a battle. Are you with me? He's been through some stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and pass him around. You can pass him around. You can throw him up in the air. You can take his arm off. You can pass his arm around. Because my G.I. Joe has been in a battle. What does that have to do with anything? Here's the deal. People don't care about a Christian who's still in the box, never been used, never been through a battle, never faced a trial, never overcome. People want a Christian, want to encounter a Christian at the break table, at the checkout stand, at the next cubicle over that's been through the battle, that's been through the war, and you're able to tell them about how God touched your business and turned it around. And you're able to tell them how God delivered you from debt, how he turned your marriage around. You've been through the battle.